Good morning, everyone. Good morning. I can see a lot of names that I'm very familiar with. Welcome, and welcome to all the ones that are not necessarily part of the FPA, but you're very welcome to this morning's briefing, book presentation, conversation, discussion with Felix Marquardt. You probably all know Felix in some way or another because he has been around a lot. But as you've seen from my bio that I sent round with the invite, and I've just confirmed with him, we can just say that at the moment we can describe him as a recovering global schmoozer. Felix came across the FPA in the last, one of the recent reincarnations as the founder of Euthanomics. And since then, we've always kept in touch, and he's been through a few other cycles. And now he is Felix of Patmos, and he's written this fantastic book, The New Nomads, which we're here to discuss today. And I hope that if you don't have a copy, just let me know, because we'll get you one, either PDF or a hard copy. Now, I'm not going to talk much, but I'm going to start my conversation with Felix. I just want to say that if you've looked at the book at all, you may have been taken in by the title, which is How Migration Makes the World a Better Place. However, I got the feeling that in the process of writing this book, Felix has used it almost as a therapeutic tool. Lots of other things have come out. It's not as simple as the title suggests. And I think that there is so much that needs to be expanded on today. And I'm delighted that we're going to start this conversation. I'm going to pin you so that everybody sees you in this conversation. Right, okay, so Felix, this, first of all, it's coming out now. You've started writing it a bit of time ago, and you started writing it in two parts, basically talking about migration, why migration is such a hot topic at the moment. You say in your in your intro that migration actually means for most of us unwanted immigration. Do you want to start us off on that?
Yeah, with pleasure. So first of all, I'm just going to take a second to thank you, Deborah, and thank you to the institution, the Foreign Press Association, for having me. This is the first book presentation of all for me. And this book has been, which is quite fitting given the title, is the product of quite a journey. The reason that I actually have always been interested, if not obsessed, with migration. There are 10 different nationalities living today in my family. I'm speaking to you from the island of Patmos, also known as the island of the apocalypse. My great-grandparents hailed from not very far from here. They headed to America in the early 20th century. So my father was born in Vienna, was born in Germany, grew up in Vienna. My mom is a Greek, Hungarian, Pole, and German born and raised in the Bronx. So there's a lot of family there. We've been journeying for a long time, but the first time I started thinking of this book was in the early 2000s, when I helped Roger Cohen at the New York Times arrange an interview with a young Frenchman of North African descent who had gone to Shanghai and who had found in Shanghai and in Guangzhou for the first time that he wasn't being treated like an Arab, a darky, a hustler, a hoodlum, a Muslim. He was treated, paradoxically, it took him going to China to be treated as a Frenchman, because to them, Rachid was not more exotic than Antoine or Sébastien or Nicolas or Jean-Baptiste. And it completely changed his life. And that was the first time. This was when I talked to Rachid, who was one of the rappers that I worked with. I used to produce French hip hop. And when he told me this story, I just thought, this is incredible. Like this, you know, growing up in France as a dark-skinned Muslim sucks. It sucks. Basically, you know, for various reasons, Muslims in France, especially young men, are treated very differently from the rest of the French population. They go to worse schools, they earn less money, they have much less access to the French job market, et cetera, et cetera. And what I saw in Rachid was that by going out there, by taking this trip, he had completely transformed the realm of the possible for him. And I'm going to change the view as well because it's flicking around right now. So that was where I started. And at the time I actually, then in the following years, I started going to Davos, first with the Herald Tribune for which I worked. And then on an ongoing basis, I ended up doing a lot of advisory in media relations. That's why I say I'm a recovered global schmoozer, because my job essentially was helping very powerful, very rich people to essentially look good. That's what my job description should have been, although it was not exactly that. But that's the bottom line of what I did was that. And making them look good in Davos was a particularly important part of this. And so when I set out writing this book 4 years ago, I had a very Davosian view of what migration was. I didn't realize it, but it was essentially, it went along with the very elitist understanding of globalization that had become since the 80s the norm in the world. Not just, this was in a way the product of the conservative revolution heralded by Thatcher and Reagan, but it was embraced by pretty much everyone. And by the time I started going to Davos, it was still, you know, that there was Bill Clinton and Tony Blair were two of the most. I'm gonna try to mute Iva. Thank you.
I muted her.
Thank you very much. So basically, I had this very, I would argue now, quite aloof understanding of migration and its virtues and its limits. And I started figuring out that my view was a bit of a joke when I went to Davos and started talking about the title of this book. Now, as you pointed out, it's very hard to not go to cliche when you write a book called The New Nomads in our day and age. I mean, it's just like cliche, 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 cliche.
The New Nomads points to like a really trendy concept. A lot of very elite nomads don't consider themselves migrants. They consider themselves jet setters, and saying I'm a nomad is like, you know, it's quite cool. And you kind of explode that myth.
Yeah, I started interrogating my vision of what migration was when I started using the term, when I started saying, oh, I got a book deal, I'm really excited, it's called The New Nomads. And every single person I met in Davos was like, oh, I'm a nomad too. I have a loft in Soho, I have a chalet in Gstaad, and I have a bungalow in Bali. I'm a nomad, my kids are nomads. I want your book. And at that point, I hadn't written a line but I felt like there's something going on here that I don't understand. And this impression was compounded when I left Davos and spoke about the title of the book with other more normal folks. And they were like, what I got very often were very blank stares. Like, what the fuck are you talking about? I don't understand. I'm not that interested, whatever. And that led me to try to understand how the word nomad, which in 1950 was still an extraordinarily negatively connotated term. The nomad was the vagrant, the bum, the homeless, the gypsy, the wandering Jew, all things that Western society still looked down upon in the mid-century. And I wondered, like, how did we go from that to the word becoming literally the coolest thing you could say you were in the opinion of the richest, most mobile, and most powerful people in the world? And that led me to, and I'm sorry, I'm just rambling now, but I'll add one thing that led me to go into the etymology of the word. And what I learned then is that the word nomad comes from the word nomos, and the word nomos means the pasture. And it comes only secondly from the word nomas, which is the act of wandering said pasture. And so what we've done, what modernity has done, is that it has flipped the meaning of the word and sort of focused entirely on the mobility aspect and forgotten about all the other, I would argue, far more genuine aspects of what that word carries, should carry, which is the pasture, local expertise, community, the importance of connection to ourselves, to others, to what we call nature, the illusion that actually it's something else from us, is in a way ever present as we talk all day long about climate breakdown and climate change, etc. You get the sense that one of the reasons that we are not more alarmed is that we have this delusion that we're not part of it. There's us and then there's nature. Nature's going to shit, but we're going to Mars, so it's okay. No. And the nomad is fundamentally aware of that. And so the sort of in this day and age of techno-narcissism, high entropy, very, very rapid mobility, we've come to pretend that was nomadism, but that's actually a measure of the incredible immaturity of our civilization.
Like, you talk about othering a lot in the book and how we tend to put people in boxes and tend to think of them as groups, and that educated liberals are particularly prone to this, even though they probably lack completely self-awareness. Do you want to because it follows on from what you've been saying now?
I think I don't think that liberals are more prone to it than people who are more, sort of regular conservative folks or, nativists, like outright racists. I think we're all in the business of othering. But what I find more problematic is that people who vote for Donald Trump, especially now, not the people who voted for him in 2016, who thought it was an interesting thing to try. I'm talking about the people who are still supporting Donald Trump now. Othering is what they do. I mean, if you ask them, are you othering immigrants, brown people, Latinos, Muslims? They'll say yes. It's not just that we do it. This is the center of our political platform. But the difference is that, on the other hand, we have this asymmetry where liberals think they don't other, which is a bit of a joke when you see just the way, they look at people who are wearing those MAGA hats. We're all othering, but liberals are liberals tend to suffer from the delusion that they're not doing it, which makes it more problematic in a way.
You talk about this pandemic being an incredible opportunity to change things. You talk a lot about how inequality is at the heart of everything. And then we can go on to Davos about this later. But I wonder, how is the pandemic for you such a turning point? What can happen now?
I mean, I don't think it's there's been a lot of literature. To be honest, I think like one of the most difficult exercises since the beginning of COVID has been the most sort of luminaries in the world who are supposed to have an opinion about sort of the human trajectory, whether it's Mr. Harari or Mr. Kissinger or all these these great experts on where we stand and where we're going. If you read the pieces that they've authored here and there since the beginning of the pandemic, the most striking common thing about all these pieces is that their shelf life is extraordinarily limited. So I don't want to go too far in sort of purporting that I understand really what this is doing to us. And I think it's going to be there's a lack of humility in attempting to say what it's doing to us, because I think it will take at least a decade before we begin to really understand what it's doing to us. But I do see that, first of all, every time there's a shitstorm, there's an opportunity, right? What we call so unfairly the Spanish flu led to the establishment, it sort of created, it's from that health crisis that the modern European health system was born. So there's in general, there's always, after major crises, there is things that, there are projects that get kickstarted that can have a very positive impact. I believe that in a way we've become a civilization of addicts. I'm an addict myself in recovery, and addiction, to get into recovery from addiction, you have to hit rock bottom. And I think that the pandemic can play such a role to some extent, and maybe it won't, to be honest. I think like the urge to go back to normal is so powerful that I'm not sure we've hit the bottom of the swimming pool, as the French say. But I think that there is, in a way, what this book is about is the discovery that, so nomadism is not roaming around the world in a plane to hang out with other people who roam around the world in planes in a different place. That is not nomadism. If you're not immersed in your local culture, if you're not embracing the place where you are, you're not a nomad. So that's one thing that's clear. Nomadism is not that modern, understanding of nomadism is a joke. It's just not. It's not what it is. But there's also something else, I think, that comes, or that I came to realize in the process of writing this book. In a way, modernity, like the subtext of most of the crises that we face, whether it's inequality, whether it's the realization of coloniality, so not the colonial systems themselves, but the dynamics of coloniality in so many of our interactions between rich countries and poor ones, within citizens of this country or that country. Whether it's the climate crisis, whether it's the populist wave and the fact that someone like Bolsonaro or that someone like Trump, that a large proportion of their electorates would think that these are the right people for the job. Those are all symptoms, in my opinion, and I'm going out on a limb here, of the fact that modernity has convinced us that metaphysics, like that having respect for what we don't understand, is not important. It's all electrons and neutrons. And the bottom line is we don't need to talk about all these things that we spent so many centuries talking about. We don't need a church anymore. We don't need, all that is, it's sort of a sign of lack of education as far as modernity is concerned. And I think as one of the people here with us, I was talking, my dear friend Dugald and I were talking recently. Modernity has respect for only two kinds of knowledge: what we know and what we will know one day. And what I would argue the metaphysics of the nomad is, and this is particularly important in the age of this age of the new era opened by the pandemic, is that nomadic metaphysics are about acknowledging that there are some things we will probably never know. And so there's a humility that comes with that is completely germane to modern thinking. So I think there's Dugald actually did a podcast recently called The Great Humbling. And I think that's exactly where we are. That's why this pandemic has so much potential, generative potential. It's because finally we see we're not that much more sophisticated than, I'm sorry, I'm gonna just take a short tangent here. One of the characters in the book is a rancher in Montana, a cattle rancher. And we were in a chat about at the beginning of the pandemic, and I was asking him, so how is it impacting you and et cetera? And he said, it's not like we're complete, like the closest shop to my ranch is 1 hour drive away. Like, I'm not affected by this pandemic. And then he called me a few days later and said, my cattle is suffering. There's a toxin that is affecting my entire cattle. I have to kill some of them. I have to separate the others. There's this disease that's attacking them. And he said, this has made me reflect. We are so not that much different from the cattle that I'm taking care of. And
Felix, can I interrupt you just
sure,
because I know that you can go on for hours. I know that. So every now and then, let me jump in. And it's to say, in the book, you talk about your recovery from addiction that I know is still ongoing, and you're very, very candid. And I wonder, you also described Davos as being a place for addicts. You were successful there because of that addiction. Do you want to talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, sure. So the first thing, addiction is an incredible way to learn to grow up. There's a way, we think that addiction is about taking too much of a certain substance that is toxic. But actually addiction is the act of, it's an ill-conceived attempt to not feel the way we feel. So addicts is like, addiction is a much more complex thing than we think. And when you end up doing, so these two guys there, named Sherlock and Watson, were born the day that I had my last drink, my last joint, my last cigarette, and my last line of cocaine. And that was 7 years plus ago. And it really changed my life a lot. And I don't think I could have ever written this book had I still been in the throes of active addiction. And I say active addiction because I still consider myself an addict. The reason for that is that you're never done with addiction. It's part of your life. And what I get is a daily reprieve from it. But I have to decide every day to give to do what it takes to earn that daily reprieve. When at the height of my addiction was also the height of my career as a global schmoozer. So for me, you know, like, addicts were people who shot up on park benches, or who, you know, smoked, like, sucked on glass pipes in crack houses. I was living like the high life. I was on TV and on the radio all the time in France. I was advising heads of state. I was flying around the world at an insane pace. Part of me thought, like, this is amazing. Like, am I not? I thought I was James Bond. Not at all an addict, you know. I thought, yeah, I have a bit of a problem, but yeah, whatever, you know. And then when I got into recovery, when active addiction brought me to my knees and everything fell apart, in recovery, I thought, wow, I was really a high functioning addict. I was still in Davos. I was still advising heads of state. I was almost impressed with myself. And then with a few, you know, the interesting thing about drug addiction is that people think, okay, he quit drinking or he quit drugging, etc. He's going to be okay now. Actually, for the first 3, 4, 5, I would argue probably 5 years, you're crazier than when you were doing drugs, because you're still insane, but you don't have your meds any longer. So actually, you're more bonkers. And so with the hindsight of about 5 years in recovery, it began to dawn on me that I was doing really well in Davos and in presidential palaces, because addiction is a disease, among others, it's a disease of the ego. It's not by chance that addiction goes very well with megalomania and narcissism and all that good stuff. And, you know, it just struck me suddenly, wait, I was working for some of the people with the biggest egos in the world, who are not just, they're not just living at the top of the pyramid. They think that they are committed in a meaningful way to improving the state of the world. I mean, it's just like, it just suddenly, it was very clear to me, like we have picked the people with the best fucking heroin on the block to convene the intervention destined to make us kick our heroin addiction. This is insane. So yeah, so hence the piece.
Yes, and in that piece, you know, moving on to your piece, Davos is Dead, because, you know, it is part of the book, but it's also something that you feel very much, committed to, because you've been a cheerleader. You've described yourself as a cheerleader for Davos, but now you say Davos is dead. And if we were to go back to Davos after the pandemic, it would mean that these people haven't understood anything at all. So what do you mean about that? And do you think Davos will restart in the plains, as you say, instead of up the magic mountain?
I mean, if you think about it for 2 seconds, first of all, it's worth remembering the plot of the Magic Mountain. So Thomas Mann writes this right after World War I. It's the story of a bunch of hyper-privileged, completely aloof European elites from around the continent who spend like a year in this hotel called the Schatzalp in Davos, where I actually threw several dinners when I was, for some of my clients in that hotel. And they have all these lofty conversations about the state of the world and what's important and what's not, and metaphysics, etc. And at the end of the book, Hans Castorp goes back down into the valley. He leaves, and World War I starts, and presumably it sort of swallows him. I think there's something worth pondering about the ethereal conversations that you hear in Davos and the insanity of the world out there, and how crazy it is that we hope that people in that little place are going to come up with things that are going to help anyone but themselves. I have one of the things, as I mentioned, that I was paid for was to have my my finger on the zeitgeist, on the pulse of the zeitgeist. And I thankfully am no longer a comms person, but I would say for sure to any of my clients, of my former clients, if you want to look like a turkey, go to Davos next January. So I don't know at all. I think, there's an extraordinary, when I wrote the column that was eventually published by the Financial Times, I pitched it around. And I realized it was fucking radioactive, because the people who run the op-ed pages of most media are political animals. It's the stepping stone to becoming the editor of the media in question. And they were all like, they wouldn't say so, but they were like, basically, I want to go to Davos. There's no way I'm publishing this, because then I'm on Klaus Schwab's shit list and I don't want to be there. Like, I want to go. So, it's a thing. I think that probably there will still be a fauna that feels completely comfortable going to Davos. But I think the pandemic has really, will have taken a very serious toll, because it's going to be very hard for them to not be sucked into the kind of conversations that like, for instance, the one that was spawned by Rutger Bregman, the Dutch historian and journalist, who was like, what about taxing the rich as a serious conversation for Davos? And it's sort of like he was in this room and the whole panel was just like, we don't want to talk about this. And he got like 4 million views on YouTube. So anyway, so I think, of course, I am in no position either to put Davos to sleep or to say, this is what's going to happen. I have no idea. But again, as I said, as a professional, as a retired PR dude, if I have one piece of advice to any CEO or politician out there, is stay the fuck away. The question is not really whether Davos is dead. Davos is dead. The question is, do you want to hang out in the realm of zombies? That's the real question.
Felix, we have some questions, so I'd like to throw it open to everyone now. Please put your hand, your yellow hand that you find at the bottom of your screen up. If you can't find it, just put it in the chat and I will see you. And because the quickest one was Vitas Rudavicius, Vitas, unmute yourself and go with the question, please. Remind us who you work with.
Hi, hello. Yeah, I'm Vitas Rudavicius from Televisa, Mexico. And the question will be, do you see any link between migration, global migration patterns and drug trafficking global patterns? And would you say, what's your opinion on that solution should be ending this war on drugs and just legalizing it and controlling? And could that transform the migration in the world as well? Thank you.
Wow, I am completely floored by this question. It's absolutely brilliant question, and I'm afraid that I'm unable to provide a good answer. But I find the analogy of the war on drugs and the war on migration it's a very powerful one. I am sold on it personally. I think it's a very good insight. I hadn't thought of it in those terms, but I think it makes a lot of sense. The way that we are pathologizing drug use and migration without looking at the fact that these are not. Without looking at the real trajectories of the people in question, I think it's a really interesting analogy. I'd love to be given the opportunity to think about that question and answer you, one-on-one after, because I think that's like an hour conversation in itself. But I think it's an incredible idea, and.
I'll pass you all the emails and details and everyone. You should have them already, but I'll make sure that Vitas is on there as well.
Yeah.
Moving on to another brilliant colleague, Anna-Marie Sipilä.
Hello, my name is Anna-Marie. I'm from Finland. And thank you so much for being with us today. And especially thank you for showing us your beautiful pets. My question is a little bit personal, if you don't mind. You mentioned how difficult it is in France for Muslim men, but I read that you yourself converted to Islam, and I was wondering, could you please tell us why and how has it influenced your work? Thank you.
Okay, so I'm going to try to not take 2 hours to answer that question. Thank you very, very much, Anna-Marie. So I converted to Islam to marry a Tunisian woman in the early 2000s. Back then, the law in Tunisia was that the law of the land was that if a Christian woman married a Tunisian man, she didn't need to convert because he would hold her. But if it was a man that was let into the family, he needed to convert. So I was converted by the Mufti of Tunisia, the highest authority, whose office, it's worth noting, was in the Ministry of Interior in Tunis. I was very happy about it. I was completely agnostic when I did this, completely agnostic. That's why I did it. Had I been a devout Christian, I would not have done it. I did it because I was agnostic and because I knew it would piss off a whole bunch of people around me, and I was delighted. I took great delight in doing things like that back then. So, but what happened is that when I began the process of recovering from addiction, I found out very soon that developing a faith in something bigger than me was a very, I mentioned how addiction is about, it's a disease of the ego. And one very simple way to stop believing that you're God is to believe in God. And so it struck me that, you know, for some people, faith is something very abstract, intellectual, conceptual. My faith is the most empirical thing in my life. I tried to stop putting copious amounts of white powder up my nose hundreds of times on my own, on Felix's power, and I got nowhere. I relapsed and relapsed and relapsed. It took a day, a month, a week, a year. I always relapsed. And then I tried asking something that I didn't understand in the morning for a day without drugs and alcohol. And in the evening, saying thank you to something I didn't understand for a day without alcohol and drugs. And I've never had another drink and another drug. So, you know, like faith, my faith is, again, the most empirical thing in my life. And when I say in the thank yous of the book, I say the most important thing in my life, I have children whom I love. I have many people that I love in my life. And things that I love, but the most important thing in my life is my relation to a higher power that I choose to call God or Allah, depending on the day. When I understood that faith was going to take a very big role in my life, I realized that I began to believe in teleology. I began to see that I should have respect and show reverence for the trajectory that had been mine. And so I saw that my conversion to Islam was not an accident. It was, in a way, it was the last time that I had a chance to get off the roller coaster of active addiction, and I did not seize that chance. And so when I began to have faith, I went back towards Islam. And some people, you know, I have endless conversations about people who are very curious about why Islam and are you sure? I mean, I was brought up by an agnostic Protestant or an agnostic of Protestant culture and an Orthodox, a Greek Orthodox who was occasionally going to the Catholic Church. And we were, me and my siblings, we were brought up in Paris. So my dad was like, we're going to do as the Parisians do. And so we were all baptized Catholic. So it's a natural question. Why Islam? Well, like for me, it's just a reverence for what I don't understand that has led me to become or to embrace my journey within Islam. But I think it's important for me to say, and I'll shut up. The big break in my life is believing in God. It's to me less important which way I have of having a relationship with God than the fact that I have a relationship with God.
Thank you. Thank you for that. Don't be intimidated by the brilliant questions that have just been asked, and please put your hand up and ask a question if you've got one. I wanted to talk a little bit about climate change, because it is the topic of the year, because we're all covering COP26. We've all seen what happened at the G7, which is basically nothing, and it is one of the topics of the year. And you say that green growth, you call it an oxymoron, and that climate crisis is really an inequality crisis. Do you want to talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, I have to here pay tribute to, again, one of the people who's in the room here, who's Dugald Hein, whose work has been one of the most, engaging with Dugald and with his work has been one of the most powerful and beautiful experiences of the journey of this book. If you want to understand how screwed we are with climate and the way we talk about it, I really recommend reading Dugald and his work. I met Dugald.
Dugald, we'll have you next time at the FPA.
Please do. You should. Dugald wrote he co-wrote a text in 2008 called Uncivilization, the Dark Mountain Manifesto, which was I think in many ways it was a fundamental part of the process which eventually led to Extinction Rebellion, the intellectual process behind it. Dugald talks, among others, about the language of sustainability. You know, like the people who go to COP talk about how do we make things sustainable. But in a way, what Greta Thunberg and her friends and other activists of her generation and an increasing number of people from other generations are saying is, sustain this shit show? Are you fucking kidding? Like, the fact that we are using this term to try to say that, you know, to continue arguing that what we should be doing is trying to get the rest of the world, including half of the global population that lives on $5 a day, to live the way, you know, not even an American does, but the way a Slovenian does. That's insane. If we all live that way, we will be at +7 degrees. +7 degrees means that life on Earth between Paris and Kinshasa is impossible for most humans. This is, you know, the latest projections of the climate scientists, the French ones who are taking part in the IPCC's reports. The high figure for 2100, given current trends, is +7 degrees Celsius. +7. I have a daughter named Saga. Please keep this to yourselves, her first name. I shouldn't have mentioned it, but I have a daughter who is 3 years old. She'll, you know, if all goes well, she will be around in 2100. It's not that far away. And this is what this is what the insanity of our modern conversations has become. We're talking about sustaining something in a world where 70% of greenhouse gas emissions are produced by the 20% wealthiest people on Earth. And the 20% wealthiest people on Earth are not billionaires or millionaires. They represent the vast majority of people in America, people in Europe, people in Japan, people in Korea, people in Australia. The vast, vast majority of the population of those countries. So, you know, this is where I hope the pandemic can have an incredible, can sort of provide the salutary or potentially salutary jolt that we need. And I'll add, one of the people that Dugald has made me read is a Viennese Croatian man who was a priest for a long part of his life, or for most of his life, although he didn't practice towards the end, but a guy named Ivan Illich, who's often confused with the main character of a story by Lev Tolstoy. But Ivan Illich provided the first sustained critique of industrial society and, in a way, of modernity, coming at it from a different angle than the postmoderns, in a way, because he had faith. And I think, like, one of the things, for instance, that might happen thanks to the pandemic is that suddenly everyone is going to read Ivan Illich. That would be an incredible development if we realized that our healthcare systems have become the contrary of what they were supposed to be, that our schools have become the contrary of what they're supposed to do. So yeah, so that would, yeah, I'm gonna shut up now. But
Felix, it just struck me while I was reading your book that you would have been up in the top of all the reading lists if you'd actually written a book on the secrets of Davos, what really goes on behind doors. But of course you didn't. You wrote this, and it feels very much like a, you know, like a trip, a voyage that you've been on of self-discovery and everything. Do you have anything left to say? Are you working on another book? What are your plans?
Thank you. So thank you for those questions. I would say the book about Davos that you mentioned is the book that I would have written when I was still an addict, because I did most of what I did to get people's attention. I was an attention-seeking missile, which, not because I've suddenly developed some amazing moral fiber, but just because that way of life almost killed me. I know it's not good for me. It's, you know, like that I can go there very easily, but it's just sort of it's a self-preservation mechanism now that saves me from trying to do things like that. So I'm really grateful that I wrote this book often thinking of my children as a gift to them, rather than you know, some sort of exercise in or sophisticated exercise in masturbation. I am writing a book. You know, like writing is it's fascinating to me how much writing is not about writing. Writing is about walking a lot, I've noticed, for me. It's about reading, of course, but it's also just about sitting with stuff long enough. And so I can say I've started writing my next book, although I haven't written much. But it's a book on addiction, that thing that we call spirituality, but which is deeply problematic a term. And the civilizational crisis at hand. So it's a story of addiction, recovery, and faith.
Do you miss your days, your crazy days as a comms expert, a PR genius, you know, a nomad in the trendy sense?
Oh, now I get to hang out with people like, I don't know if Alia is still here, but she is. I see, I get to hang out with my friend Alia, Ibrahim, with Dougal, with Sasha, and I get to do talks like this, and I get to hang out with these guys again. So no, I really feel, I'm glad I have a healthy sort of, I don't want to say all of that is shit and now everything's fantastic. That's not at all my view. I'm grateful for the lows and the highs of my journey. It's been an amazing journey. You know, like I feel, frankly, I should be dead right now. I'm speaking to you, I should be dead. Like I spent, you know, just so you understand, like I spent several years waking up, and the act of waking up led me to my first thought was, oh shit, I'm still alive. That was my life. That was the kind of pain that consciousness brought to me. So, you know, I should be dead. I'm here talking with you guys. I'm very grateful for the fact that what didn't kill me, but that it brought me here. And everything, all this is bonus for me.
Anna-Marie, do you want to finish off?
Thanks. Just a short one, please. If Davos, as we know it, is dead, what is the next Davos?
It's a good question. I try to answer that in the book, but I think I don't do a very good job at it, because I think what I imagined in the book is still, it's sort of might lead, like it's a work in progress. And I think, you know, the question really is, how do you do something, how do you build a process that is truly generative, that doesn't just end up being Davos, again, a different kind with different people? And I think I've begun to sort of figure that out, or not figure out what will replace Davos, because I don't think I want to be part of what might replace Davos. But clearly, there's never been more need for the world to get together to have serious conversations about where we stand and where we're going. So that I want to be part of. But I think that scaling is going to be, we need to recognize that our urge to scale everything, which Davos has fallen prey to, as most events have, whether it's TED, all these events, we're obsessed with scaling. We want to bring everyone in, and we want as many people as possible to participate. I think that's a mistake. There's a term that a friend of Dougal's and mine has coined recently, or the work that she's part of, like the group that she's part of has coined this term, heteroglossia. Okay, so Sherlock has an opinion. But so heteroglossia is what happens when everyone's talking about sustainability or the environment, and actually you realize when you're talking with them that you're not at all talking about the same thing. And I think that is one of the big problems of Davos. They'll say green, sustainable, climate awareness, and then they go home and they think that they've done something, when actually the only way to really move the proverbial needle is to actually create the conditions for the words to mean the same thing. And that is not something that can happen at the top of the mountain or anywhere in 3 days every year. It's a process that requires a relationship to be built between the participants. And the fact that building that relationship is so important means that the process probably needs to have a very limited number of participants. And it means it needs to be a process, not an event. It needs to be an ongoing conversation that sometimes you don't want to go to because you're not in the mood, you know? So, and it's not exciting, and you're not going to bump into, you know, Bill Gates or Bono. It's going to be fucking boring. And that process to me looks a lot more like the meetings of many 12-step programs.
I think that's a brilliant way to end this conversation. Felix, thank you so much to everybody who was here. Thank you for the wonderful questions. And I'll send round PDF copies of the book to anybody who doesn't have one. Thank you so much, Felix, for taking the time and for talking so candidly about your book. And we'll be in touch as usual.
Thank you so much for being here, all of you. And Deborah, I'm so grateful that you were one of the very first people to read the manuscript, because you know, it's for me, it's a real privilege that the first conversation I had and presentation of the book I had was with you guys. Thank you.
Thank you. Bye, everyone.
Thank you. Thanks. Bye.